Mercedes and Red Bull tried to get a little bit stylish with a loophole that has now been banned by the FIA. An exploit the rules used by Mercedes and Red Bull has been nipped in the bud by the FIA. It created quite a stir online this week. But I want to preface the rest of this with it's probably not as big of a factor as the clickbait on Twitter will probably tell you it is. And I'm going to explain. But Kevin, I want your thoughts. What do you know about this? And then if you don't know something, I'd like to fill in the blanks.
I would like for you to fill in all of the blanks because all I know is Mercedes and Red Bull does not benefit McLaren. So therefore, boo, bad McLaren, bad Mercedes. Get it out. Get it out. Mercedes or McLaren good. McLaren good.
Okay. Yeah, so
I'm not biased.
Average F1 Twitter user, but a loophole with the battery management was discovered and used in Australia, notably by both Mercedes and I think it was picked up on by Red Bull. And that allowed them to basically maximize the battery up to the start-finish line and then perform what is an emergency shutoff procedure that basically gave them an added boost right up to the end of their qualifying laps. The way the regulations look, or work, basically, the regulations call for a loss of 50 kilowatts per second of battery loss under deployment. But there was a scope in the regulations that allowed for teams to not have to follow that ramp down if the engine was shut off due to a technical reason, like a technical issue, like a component failure or like an emergency or something. The loophole was found in what was defined as a legitimate reason to power down the engine and what could be used for that competitive advantage, basically. So the teams took this interpretation that was a little bit too vague, is what it sounded like, and utilized it to their advantage. Wasn't breaking the rules. It was, again, the sport works in loopholes and gray areas, and both Red Bull and Mercedes were utilizing it. But what does it really look like? In essence, it's just more power for a little bit longer. So a hair of more speed on the final straight, coming out of the final turn. But the tell on this and how people discovered it in the first place was the near complete stop we would see after the laps were completed. So the cars would enter like a 1-minute reboot on track. Other teams noticed this back in Australia. The casual viewer, it looks like a routine stop. It looked like nothing was happening, like anything that would happen normally during a qualifying. Like somebody would finish their lap, pull off to the side, and start going slow. But everybody can see everybody else's telemetry, basically. And a lot of teams noticed how much harder that the Mercedes, at least in Australia, were ramping down. This was seen most notably in a deficient way by Alex Albon not in Australia, in Japan. It caused him to stop super, super hard. And going into T1 in Japan, it caused a yellow flag, almost a red flag, and then they were able to reboot the car and get it going again. The estimates, however, and this is why when I said earlier, it's not as big of a factor as the clickbait articles and the F1 Twitter articles or headlines will give you, is that it probably doesn't amount for much of a loss or a gain, in this case. According to reporting from the race, gains were likely in the hundredths of a second range. So for those hailing, this is like a potential like Mercedes killer. I'm not going to bet on that. I would not bet on that. It was usable in Australia. Mercedes apparently they didn't even utilize this in China or Japan after finding issues with it. And basically, it wasn't a massive factor. When Mercedes used it, obviously, they shot up the Fords, blah, blah. That they looked great in Australia, but they were still leagues ahead without using this in China and Japan. In totality, Mercedes, this brings them a little bit closer back during qualifying to like Ferrari and your boys, McLaren, but it doesn't really hamper the race performance. For Red Bull, this brings them closer to the pits of despair. Every little advantage that they can find, they're clinging on to. This is one of those things that's not going to go their way. So that's the totality of it. That's the best way I can explain it in a couple of minutes or less. Why was it a big headline? There's not a lot going on right now, guys. There's not a lot of huge breaking news. Any little changes to these regulations is still going to be noteworthy and newsworthy. Your impressions Khaki Kevin Walker.
I really don't have that many impressions. We're gonna get a variety of these kinds of situations that are gonna pop up this season, next season, and the next season after, as we continue to work through these new regulations. And once they're not new anymore, still all the gray areas that are going to be exploited by any of the teams, by the top engineers and the top technical directors, all those gray areas are going to be tested, and all of them are going to be complained about, because like we've said in many episodes before, whatever your team doesn't come up with, well, that's not supposed to be allowed, right? That's not supposed to be there. But if all 11 teams on the grid did this, then the FIA probably wouldn't have done anything, because nobody would have ever complained. It's just how these things work. It's well, I didn't come up with this, so boo you. And you don't get it because I don't get it. That's how these things work. It's all about gray areas. And I think that these things are going to continue to happen. This one, I think you did an incredible job explaining it.
And the way I understand it too was like Ferrari noticed it, and they're looking for clarification on whether or not they should pursue this as an avenue, or if it should have been outlawed. And the FIA was like, oh, this could be kind of a safety hazard. If the cars are completely shutting off during qualifying laps, during qualifying, it could be a huge problem. So closing this loophole, yeah, like it's a bit of it nips a little bit of time off of Mercedes. At most, this is a 10th, but I think that's incredibly optimistic. For Red Bull, this hurts them a little bit more on their grid position. But overall, I mean, it's one of the loopholes that are being clamped down on. And it's not a massive portion of the regulation, but it was more or less just, hey, like, stop doing that, guys. We're still awaiting news of any actual regulation tweaks or alterations. Like you mentioned, there's going to be a lot of things that are being discussed and talked about over the next few days and the next couple of weeks going back into Miami. There are actually meetings in regards to regulation tweaks actually happening as we speak.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, do you think any changes are going to be made, or tweaks as we could put it, rather than changes before Miami? Or do you think that's going to be a post-Miami situation?
Like reading on it, looking into it and reading on it as best as I could, it seems that there's not going to be a lot that's changing. I would say this might be one of the more notable ones, but it was, again, a small performance advantage that was more or less nominal. I would say, based on everything that I've read and everything that I've seen, I wouldn't expect there to be many even major tweaks. There's a bit of a back and forth going on behind the scenes, but everybody wants to make sure that they do it right and they do it effectively. Obviously, there are a lot of F1 fans who aren't happy with these regulations. They want to see them thrown in the bin, but that's not really how this sport works. It would take time for there to be something new put in place.
Yeah.
But there are meetings that are addressing tweaks that might need to be made to try to make the racing a little bit better. One of the problems that a lot of fans have is that qualifying, there's more lifting and coasting happening in qualifying than a lot of fans remember or have ever really seen. And so pushing the cars to the limit is not happening the same way that we're used to seeing in qualifying of the last few years, for instance. The problem would be that if they, let's say, took away more of the engine or the battery power, that the cars would just be notably slower. You're really not pushing the cars to the limits either. So there's a lot of give and take. I think any kind of major changes or tweaks would have to happen going into the next season, maybe even in 2028, considering that all the teams are already developing their cars for next year. Once the next season starts, you can begin developing for the next season. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth between the 11 teams. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth between the power unit suppliers. There's going to be a lot of back and forthing about major or minor tweaks. But I wouldn't expect anything major. Based on everything I've read, tweaks at most, you're not expecting any overhauls. Meetings in regards to the tweaks happening today, as of this recording, the 15th, the day of this episode's release, the 16th. There's also going to be further discussions, and there's a higher level meeting happening on the 20th to continue smoothing out edges that have been agreed upon within the regulations, making sure everything A, can actually happen, and B, can be implemented within a certain amount of time. I wouldn't expect a ton of stuff that happens in 2026. So if that's what you're hoping for, sorry, I'm going to kill your optimism there. But there's probably going to be some changes going towards the end of the season, things that might be implemented that teams are going to have a period of adjustment to. And then in 2027, you'll probably see more of the actual reflection of anything a little bit more major, or even, you know, on the medium level of severity. So some changes, yeah, but nothing. I'm just saying, for a number of F1 fans who are not a big fan of these regulations, there are things I like, and there are things I don't necessarily like either. I try to be as pragmatic about it as I can be. I enjoy these regulations, I think, more than other people have in the past, or other members of the F1 community. I might be more optimistic for sure, but it looks like they're smoothing out edges where they can. But getting 11 teams to all agree in unison is sometimes a really, really, really hard thing to do.
True. That is true.
Yep. So for the TLPs, though, what are your thoughts on the FIA clampdown? Do you think it's going to have a bigger ramification for Mercedes and Red Bull than maybe even the experts are estimating? Let us know in the comments below.